Hello YouTube. It's been a while since my last video. I recall saying that I would talk about my teaching style in the next one, so here it is. I've decided to make one more. Um, so, disclaimer before I talk a little bit about teaching style is that this is just the way I like to do things. I'm sure that my predecessor did things differently and her predecessor did things differently, and I know that other AOTs teach differently. I'm not saying I'm better or worse than anyone. This is what works for me. And also, the other part is that this is what works for me teaching at a high level school. Some of these things maybe you would be able to do at a lower level school. I'm not sure. Anyway, so my teaching style consists of three parts. Every class that I'm in charge of has three parts. Of course, there are classes that I'm not really in charge of, and those classes kind of go however the main teacher wants it to go, and I do whatever I can, right? But when I'm in charge, there are three parts, and those are engage, study, and activate. And that's something I learned from one of the ALT group meetings that we have sometimes. It's like training, and I've tried to adapt that into my lessons. But basically, the way I think of it is warm up and then study, which is like the main kind of meat of the class, and then some kind of group work, something that they have to talk together about. So the first part, like the engage part or the warm up part for me, I like to tell students stories. At a high level school, it's probably a bit easier for me to do that because they can understand a lot of the things that I talk about. Now, they're high school kids. It's not difficult to talk about myself, right? I've traveled a lot. I've lived in a lot of different countries, so I can tell them stories. And that's what I thought at first. But the thing is that eventually you do start to run out of material to tell your students that is interesting and engaging, after more than a year of teaching. So what I tried to do is I thought I'd keep track in a little notebook of the stories I've told and who I've told it to. And that works to a degree. And if you want to do the stories thing, that's probably something you should have well organized. Otherwise, you run into the problem, which has happened a couple of times to me, that you end up telling the same story to the kids and they don't say anything, but you see the look in their eyes like, oh yeah, and then this happened. Which is okay. Just means you're not lying. Or if it's a lower level class or if you're out of stories, I think a warm-up is still important so you can play some kind of game. Recently, I've liked to play this game where they all stand up and I ask them questions. They raise their hands, and the first one to answer my question, that row or that column gets to sit down. So it's kind of this just warm-up activity, or they can ask you questions. There's a lot of different activities you can do for warm-up. But anyway, the point of warm-up is just because they have a lot of classes, and it's kind of jarring, I think, to switch from like math to English without any segue. So it's just to get them kind of enthusiastic about the rest of the class, right? Anyway, if possible, it's good to make that relate to the main bulk of the lesson, which is part 2, the engage part, or like the meat of the class, which if you have a textbook, that's going to be whatever lesson you want to do in the textbook that day. So that depends a lot on the textbook, and if you have a good textbook, then you can go through how much you want to do in that day and pick and choose the things that you want to go through, right? So you don't have to do an entire chapter if it doesn't feel like you can finish it in time. You can look through the pages that you want to do. So I'm doing this, and this, and then we're going to stop and we're going to skip part B here, and that's what I really like. Those kind of textbooks give me some flexibility to work on what I think is important and still leave a little bit of time at the end to do the third part. But if you don't have a textbook for the main part, then you're teaching something with worksheets that you have made, like slang, or you're teaching debate class or something like that. So you should have that ready, right? So if you're going to use worksheets, use worksheets. If you got an iPad like I do now, then you can show pictures or show little videos, or some kind of visual aid. It really goes a long way. And I'm not going to talk too much about the main part other than for me, you either have a textbook or you don't. And I think it's easier when you have a textbook, because then they can all be on the same page, literally and figuratively. And if you don't, you have to come up with your own lesson plans, which can be the most exciting part of this job when it goes well, and can also fail horribly, horribly when it doesn't go well. Like when you give hints about a word and it's swimming pool, and the students say that, and you ask them how to spell it on Google, and they give you the right spelling, but you type swimming poop. I destroyed their little minds. Sorry, they recover. Anyway, moving past that main part, the third part that I think is the most important out of the three is the activate, or like the group part. I think of it as group work, because in the first part of the class, you're talking for the most part, right? So they're just listening to natural sounding English, which is important, and the second part is they're kind of engaged in some technical aspect or some new information. But that third part is, I think, the most important, because they have to use English to talk to each other, right? They're not going to go outside of this school and speak English to their families or their friends, most likely. So it's important for them to speak to each other in class, right? Because then they have a chance to practice the English that they learned with each other, which is why group work is important to me. If I ever have a say in it, I like the students to do something together at the end of the class so that they can practice talking to each other. Practicing with me is good, but they see me like not that often, so it's good for them to talk to other people. So I think that last part is important. Even if I like groups, but you can also play a game, right? And they don't have to necessarily be in groups, as long as they have some incentive to talk to each other, or some incentive to talk to each other to, work against you in a game, or work against each other in a game. So long as they're kind of interacting with each other and practicing, that's what I think is important. So like one thing I'll do sometimes is I'll make a worksheet with some questions and give them a time limit and see which group can finish first, right? So then the questions are a little bit more difficult, and they have to work together and talk to the members of their group to, figure out the dictionary word, or figure out how to tell the story the best. Or another great game is, I think there's a name for it. I call it the 3 stories game, where you tell 3 stories, one of them's a lie, right? So they have to, as a group, write 3 little stories about one of the group members, or 3 of the group members, and then one of them is a lie, and then the other students have to guess which one. You assign points. But the point of that is that they all have to sit together and figure out how to express this story and write it and then present it in English. So that's a really good one. I think that's it. So my classes, I like to have those 3 sections. I like the interaction at the beginning to be just me, kind of a light, humorous, if possible, storytelling or game, or just something to lighten the mood, because it's important to get them to like you. Having that good relationship with your students goes a long way towards getting them enthusiastic about learning English. And the second part is the meat, so technical aspect. And the third part is what you should really focus the first 2 parts of the class towards, making sure that the third part goes well, I think. Again, this is just my opinion. I'm sure that people do it differently, but I like this style. This works for me, has worked for me. So, take that with a grain of salt, and that's that. I am not sure that I have a lot more advice to give. That's what I originally started doing these videos like a year ago. But I'm running out of ideas, so if there's anything that you want to see, or questions that you want to ask them in the comments, and I'll maybe make a video about it at some point in the future. But otherwise, I might do some more videos, but not necessarily school-related things. Like this weekend is my 1-year anniversary with my lady, so like that kind of thing. I might do a video for that, or just life in Japan. But specifically, videos about teaching as an ALT, I'm not sure where else to go. So if you want more of those, you got to give me ideas. Signing out.